Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the ACC and some of the stuff happening over there. Clemson and Florida State have some very interesting decisions in front of them, so we will keep you updated with all of that type of stuff. But now let's talk some Deion Sanders. But before we get to Deion, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to see your questions on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth, or you can just ask me something that you'd like to get my opinion on, and I can respond to you immediately. You can use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all to be able to watch the show. See your name on the screen is a little bit of fun, so we can have a fun back and forth here. But let's talk about Deion, because he's been in the news a lot, and that's who he is. He's in the news a lot pretty much every second of every day, it feels like, since he's joined Colorado. He's been a big topic of conversation, and people have opinions. There's no doubt about that. But let's start with his most recent comments and kind of work our way back through the week, because he's had a busy week. Let's put it that way. It started on, or well, it didn't start, but the most recent comment was this past Saturday on a podcast, $1 Million Worth of Money with Wallow and Gilly. They had Deion Sanders on, and they were just talking about his career. He's a very interesting guy. Obviously, everyone wants to talk to him, but they got to the topic of Shedeur Sanders and his future in the NFL and kind of what the next steps were going to be for him, and kind of just how they were viewing kind of the next year and what the next steps were. First of all, they asked him where he thinks Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders would end up going in next year's draft, because there's almost no doubt in my mind they will be in the 2025 draft. They are just ridiculous athletes that will almost definitely go top 10, barring some, crazy downfall from Colorado this year. But he said anywhere between 1 and 4 for both those guys. So he thinks that at least half of the top 4 picks will be coming from Colorado, and it will be those two guys. And those are really the only two guys that have a shot of being up at that top. And it's not that that's impossible, because both these guys are remarkably talented. They have ability that's just off the charts, and it's obviously lofty, but that's Deion. That's the way he works. He doesn't work in anything other than lofty goals and lofty aspirations for his kids and for himself. So that's the way he operates. And if you were going to bet on two kids, I think Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders are two pretty good bets. I won't lie to you. So I'm not necessarily upset about the way that he put that. I think there are a lot of people that will, question that will say he's crazy, but both those guys definitely are on the short list of people that could find themselves in that group of the top 4 picks. So I don't necessarily think that's the crazy part. The crazy part was where they asked him about, possibly where he could go and what teams would be in that position and all of that type of stuff. And he made the comment that some cities just aren't going to happen. Some cities just are off the list immediately. It is going to be an Eli Manning type situation where he said he had an idea of where he would like them to go, ideal situations. I don't know where those are. No one other than Deion would know where he's exactly thinking, but as of right now, it looks like certain teams are just off the list before the season even starts. And obviously, I'm not the biggest fan of this strategy. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of kids going into a room and saying, I'm not playing for you, because you never really know what a situation is on a football team until you get in the doors. But at the end of the day, it's their decision to make, and if everyone's cool with it, more power to them. He did say he doesn't want them to play somewhere cold. I gotta be honest, I don't know if that's gonna have a ton of effect on what happens on draft night, but who knows? Maybe they just cross out the entire northern half of the United States and call it a day. But at the end of the day, it looks like whatever cities they are, city X, Y, and Z, let's call them. If Deion doesn't want his kid to play there, if Deion doesn't want Shedeur drafted by those teams, and he wants that message to get out to GMs and coaches and personnel, it's going to get out there. it's Deion Sanders. He has plenty of connections. He has plenty of people that he can get in the ear of and get them to spread that message across the league. And he definitely means business. That's just kind of the way he is. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were some teams that were getting calls throughout, the draft process saying, don't even bother. But obviously, this is going to get a lot of people a little bit riled up. Anything that Deion does definitely gets a ton of people excited, and everyone has a very hard opinion on a lot of things that he says. But at the end of the day, this is something that I wouldn't necessarily agree on doing, but more power to them if they feel that this is the best thing for them. And it'll be interesting to see all of this play out, because it's obviously something that's only happened once, and that was, Archie Manning being Archie Manning and being a huge part of the NFL. And Deion carries a lot of weight. There's no doubt about that. So it'll be interesting to see all of that unfold. I'm not sure how it will all unfold, but he definitely has a vision. There's no doubt about that. And they also asked him, I don't know if this was on the same podcast or somewhere different, but he was asked about Shedeur Sanders and his possibility of what would have happened if he had gone into this draft class. And he said obviously he would have gone high. He thinks that he would have been the second quarterback off the board, which as of right now would make him the second player off the board. And I just don't necessarily buy that. He did say some GMs and personnel have told him that, so who am I to say that they didn't? But at the end of the day, I think it's incredibly hard to beat out the group of guys that are up at the top. So Shedeur Sanders' ceiling is out of this world. The arm talent is remarkable. The physical ability is insane. But Caleb Williams is all of that, but further down the road in terms of maturity, played more football, done a ton more on the football field that makes you feel confident. Jaden Daniels is coming off a Heisman season and still hasn't hit his ceiling, if you're asking me. Drake May currently has a better pocket presence and mobility in the pocket. Now, a lot of that has to do with Shedeur Sanders not having much of a pocket to begin with throughout last year, but at the end of the day, there are some traits that these guys just have over him. And it's going to be really hard for him to match that. And I think you could definitely talk me into him going fourth. You could definitely talk me into him being, one of a top 10 draft pick, because the talent is obviously there, the potential is through the roof, but there's still some work to be done, obviously. So I'm glad he came back to school. I think if he was to go in this draft, he would be drafted high, but I think there would have been some growing pains that would have made it a little bit tougher. Coming back for one more year gives him at least a chance to get his feet wet a little bit longer and be a little bit more comfortable going to the next level. And there's definitely a chance for him to be the number one guy off the board. There's no doubt about that. He could definitely be QB1 in this next class. And there's two guys in particular that I think he's kind of battling for that position, and it's Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers. I feel like both those guys are obviously part of huge teams in Georgia and Texas. Quinn Ewers just came off a playoff run, which is huge. Carson Beck is set up for a fantastic year in his senior year. So both those guys, I think, are kind of setting the pace right now. But at the end of the day, Shedeur Sanders might have the highest ceiling of all those dudes because of his physical and athletic ability. So he's someone that definitely could be QB1. He's battling some really, really good players, but at the end of the day, he could definitely pull it off if he can put together a really, really good season for Colorado. He's just going to be up against two guys that are set up to put up incredible seasons at Texas and UGA. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out and where he ends up, because I think right now he's QB3, but definitely QB1 is in the cards for Shedeur Sanders. But finally, earlier in the week, last week, we had a couple of people anonymously go on the record and talk about Deion's recruiting and the way that he kind of approaches recruiting. And there was the fact that he hasn't gone on the home visit since joining Colorado. Some people have called him a lazy recruiter, and there's a couple of things that go into this. There's a couple of things that kind of not necessarily totally invalidate it, but definitely put it kind of in more perspective. First of all, Deion does have some medical issues that do cause problems if you were to fly. So some longer recruiting trips are just fully off the table because he's had different blood clots and problems with his health that just make it more dangerous to fly. So I'm not going to at all knock him for that. He obviously should do what's best for his health. And then second, Deion recruits a lot of portal kids. That's the way he goes about business. We all know that, and I'll get to my thoughts on that in a second. But home visits aren't nearly as common when you're recruiting kids in the transfer portal. Sometimes you'll find a kid over winter break, and you'll go to their house. I know Jabbar Muhammad this past cycle had a couple of teams come to his house in Dallas, but at the end of the day, they're not nearly as common. They're not something that needs to happen by any means. So that's another thing that he doesn't necessarily do it that often because it doesn't necessarily call for it that often. And then finally, he is Deion Sanders. Like we need to know who we're talking about here. He is one of the best football players to ever play, maybe the best corner to ever do it, and was absolutely electric. He is someone that totally transcended that generation, and a lot of that generation now has kids that are 18 or 16 or going throughout their recruiting cycle. So his recruiting is done when they look up his highlights and they see just how ridiculous he was. They see the remarkable celebrations that he pulled off, or when their dad tells stories about just how remarkable he was on Sundays and Saturdays. So although obviously, it's not necessarily the way that a lot of people go about business, it's not the way that I would go about business, we don't have to go about business the same way Deion Sanders does, and he definitely doesn't have to go about business the same way we do because he's an icon in this sport, and he holds a certain amount of weight just walking into the room, or when you walk into his facilities, just seeing him holds a little bit of weight. So although it's not necessarily the way that a lot of people attack it, and it's not necessarily the way that I would attack it, which I'll get into right now, it's Deion Sanders. He's going to be different, and he's getting it done for the time being. So until things flip, I'm not going to necessarily hate on him for the way that he's going about it. Now, do I think this is the best way to go about it? Absolutely not. I've been pretty steadfast on Deion's recruiting tactics are very clear, obviously. He wants to go to the portal. That's where he wants to get the majority of his talent. He feels kids that have been playing in college for multiple years are the right way to go, and I can't necessarily go against him on that. Obviously, you want guys with experience walking in to your program, but the teams that set themselves apart, the teams that are the biggest programs in this sport right now, recruit high school at a ridiculous level. The three programs that have stood above a lot of other programs throughout the last decade or so has been Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State. As we know, those are kind of the teams where for the past however long, especially throughout the playoff period, the conversation starts with those three teams in a lot of ways. They all recruit the high school level at a remarkably high level. Like, it's just insane what they do year over year, and a lot of that, obviously, at Alabama was Nick Saban. We'll see what Kalen DeBoer can do throughout his first couple of years. But at the end of the day, those are the big-time programs. Those are the teams that get the most guys to the NFL. Those are the teams that win the most championships. And that's still the right way to go about it. Recruiting a kid from high school and developing him into not only the best player that he can be, but also the player that you want him to be, because certain programs have different needs and different styles of play. So you get a kid from high school, you can kind of mold him into an aggressive outside linebacker, or you can mold him into a pure third down defensive end if you absolutely need him to. If you get kids from the portal, they come to you kind of half-baked. They come to you kind of who they are, they're built the way they are, and you have to fit them into puzzle pieces. So it's not necessarily that it can't be done, and Deion Sanders has done a remarkable job pretty much every single year of his coaching career at doing this, at bringing in guys and immediately getting them into places to succeed. And obviously, last year was not ideal, but still pretty impressive from where they were coming and how much turnover they underwent. Getting as many wins as they got is insane, honestly, if we're really being totally honest here. And I think Deion has that ability to get all the guys on the same page very quickly and bring in guys that, you know, might be new to the program, but as long as they respect Deion and listen to him, everything will kind of fall into line. But at the end of the day, I don't know how sustainable this approach is. I don't know how long he can stay at one place and continue this type of success. So a lot of people have been talking about what's the next step for Deion, because I think none of us really expect for Colorado to be the end-all be-all, although he has created a remarkable energy around there and seems very happy there. He definitely has his sights on either a bigger school or maybe the NFL or whatever, and he better hope that winning happens very quickly at Colorado, because I tend to believe once you get to 25, 26, just a couple of years down the road, the portal will start to dry up just a little bit more, and it'll be a little bit harder for him to put together the puzzle pieces the way he has been, and he's going to have to replace Shedeur Sanders after this year. So there's a big hole right there that you're going to have to get someone to jump into and be at that level of play. So I tend to think that this 2024 year is huge for Deion. I think if he can have success, and you can garner success at Colorado however you want, I tend to believe 8-4 would be huge. But if he can have success, I think he might just take his chance and go somewhere else, because I don't necessarily love the recruiting tactic. I think it's a little bit boom or bust kind of potential. We saw this with Mel Tucker at Michigan State, where he wins 10 games, 2 years later is fired because he doesn't have a lot of guys to replace the transfers that just walked out. So it's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of different things happening. And although Deion is an absolute mastermind, and I think one of the better coaches in the game right now, I really like him. I think he's great for the sport. He's a little bit of old school, a little bit of new school. I think he is very interesting and obviously brings tons of eyes, brings fans, and gives me tons of topics to talk about on here. But he's obviously a very controversial topic. It'll be interesting to see how all of this develops, whether it's Shedeur or the recruiting stuff or just him in general, Colorado going into 2024, and kind of his future. But at the end of the day, Colorado is going to be a huge topic of conversation. They're going to be someone that we definitely talk about quite a bit. And if they can burst onto the scene, all of the stuff that he's been talking about can happen. Shedeur can go #1 overall, and Travis Hunter could go #4. He could get a great new job, whether it's at the NFL or at a big program, because there are a couple out there that definitely have some coaches that are sitting on some thin waters right now. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this develops. He's obviously a very confident guy, so we'll see. It's all very interesting. It's all very fascinating whenever he has a comment, because the amount of confidence this dude has in himself and his kids is just absolutely remarkable. But I'll definitely keep everyone updated on any new happenings in the world of Deion, because he is a very interesting guy to talk about, and he definitely gets the people going, that's for sure. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk recruiting. There was a ton happening over the weekend, and a ton of guys committing in the 2025 class that I want to get to, so stick with us, and we will be right back with that.